The mountains don't speak in words, but every hiker who has walked deep enough into the wilderness swears the land has a voice. Sometimes it whispers like wind through dying pines. Sometimes it groans like something old and buried shifting in the dark. And sometimes, only sometimes, it calls your name. Hiker's Last Trail is a phrase thrown around as a joke by backpackers online, a supposed compilation of chilling encounters from people who claim they survived something unnatural. But most never post the full story. Some disappear from forums. Some delete accounts. Some stop talking entirely. What you're about to read are the 10 most disturbing hiking horror stories ever submitted. Stories never meant to be stitched together, but sharing one chilling truth. The forest remembers who enters it, and not everyone comes back the same. The first story came from a man named Connor, an experienced backpacker who loved solo hikes. In his email, he wrote that he had taken a trail deep in Colorado, one that wasn't on any map but which he found marked with a simple wooden sign, before sundown. He assumed it meant the trail was beautiful at sunset, maybe recommended for golden hour views. By the time he realized the sign was a warning, the sky was dimming into streaks of red. The forest grew almost too quiet, except for a strange clicking noise, like rocks tapping together just out of sight. Connor described how the path seemed to lengthen. He remembered walking for nearly an hour without seeing the same ridge or tree shape twice. The clicking followed, steady, matching his steps like a second pair of feet. When he finally turned around, thinking maybe an animal was stalking him, he saw a shape standing between the trees.
Tall, thin, wrong.
Not quite human, not quite animal. A figure made of shadow, like it was absorbing the last remaining light. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood. Connor ran until his lungs tore with fire. The clicking kept pace with him, but no matter how fast he sprinted, the shape never came closer. It simply appeared between trees, always ahead of him, always watching. When he finally burst out into a ranger-maintained section of the forest, the clicking stopped instantly. Rangers later told him there was no such trail, no such sign, and the area he described had been closed off for 5 years after multiple disappearances. The second story came from a hiker couple, Aiden and Melissa, who were exploring a range in Utah known for its canyons. They camped near a gorge where ancient petroglyphs decorated stone walls. Around midnight, they awoke to whispers echoing up the canyon, coming from below, voices speaking in a language they didn't recognize. At first, they thought it was another group camping. But the longer they listened, the clearer it became that the whispers didn't belong to just one voice. Dozens murmured at once, rising and falling like a chant. When Aiden shone his flashlight over the canyon rim, Melissa said she saw dozens of pale hands reaching up out of the darkness. Not clawing, not threatening, reaching, as if begging to be pulled out. The moment she screamed, the whispers cut off. The canyon fell silent. The next morning, the couple hiked out without speaking. When they tried to report the strange noises to a ranger, the ranger said people often hear things in that canyon, especially at night, and advised them never to camp near the petroglyphs again. The third story was from a teenage girl named Brooke. Her family had taken a summer trip to Arizona, hiking a desert trail famous for its red rock formations. Brooke wandered slightly off path to photograph a twisted juniper tree. For a moment, she looked through her camera's viewfinder, adjusting the focus. When she lowered it, the landscape around her had changed. The sky was darker, filled with low swirling clouds. The air smelled like rain and dust. The trail behind her was gone. The juniper tree looked dead. Brooke screamed for her parents, but the desert swallowed her voice. She took one shaky step forward, only for the world to snap back instantly. Sunny sky, red rocks, the living juniper. Her parents calling for her from less than 30 feet away. She never told them what happened, but she included the picture she took before the shift. I still have that photo. In it, the juniper tree is healthy, framed beautifully. But if you zoom in near the base of the trunk, there's something peeking out from behind the bark. 2 dark eyes. Too human. Too aware. The fourth story came from an ultralight backpacker named Erin. She had been hiking a well-known long-distance trail, covering almost 30 miles a day. On her 7th night, after setting up camp near a creek, she heard footsteps approaching. Thinking it was another hiker, she called out, but got no reply. The footsteps were heavy, dragging, like someone pulling a large sack. Erin stayed in her tent, gripping her trekking pole like a weapon. Then the footsteps stopped directly outside her tent. She described the shadow on the nylon, tall, hunched, shoulders rising and falling with slow, wet breathing. When she finally gathered the courage to unzip the tent just an inch, she saw nothing. Not footprints. Not bent grass. Not a trail. In the audio recording she sent me, you can hear her voice shaking as she said, "It didn't walk away. It just vanished." The fifth story came from 3 college students hiking the Pacific Northwest. They found a small wooden cabin deep in the woods, clearly abandoned, but with smoke rising from the chimney. Thinking someone might need help, they approached. The door creaked open before they touched it. Inside, the cabin was empty, no furniture, no tools, no fireplace even though they had seen smoke. Just wooden walls scarred with claw marks. One of the boys took a photo of the inside. When they checked it that night, the image showed a woman standing in the corner. Her dress was old-fashioned, her face blurred, and none of them had seen anyone inside that cabin. The sixth story was from a man who simply called himself R. He and his dog were hiking in West Virginia when the forest around them went silent. R's dog froze, whimpering at the tree line. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, R heard someone calling his name. His exact name. The voice was identical to his mother's. She had been dead for 3 years. His dog howled, pulling violently at the leash, refusing to move toward the voice. R finally lifted his dog and ran. He said the voice followed him for nearly half a mile, growing angrier each time he ignored it. The seventh story came from a woman named Dana who worked as a search and rescue volunteer. She said they often found hikers who had gone missing for a day or two, disoriented but alive. But sometimes they found strange things instead, like perfectly stacked cairns made of bones, or clothing arranged in circles around tree trunks. She said the worst case she encountered was a man they found standing in a river at dawn, staring upstream, unmoving. When they approached, he whispered, "It's behind you." But nothing was there. The man never spoke again. The eighth story was from a group of friends who encountered something impossible, footprints in fresh mud that walked alongside them for miles but were shaped like hands, not feet. The impressions were deep, as if whatever made them weighed far more than a human. They said the sound of those hands slapping the earth echoed long after they'd reached their car. The ninth story was from a woman named Leah who had a habit of night hiking. One evening, she saw a hiker ahead of her wearing a red jacket. Whenever she got close, he walked just a little faster. Eventually, she began to feel frustrated, shouting for him to let her pass.
He didn't respond.
After almost half an hour, she rounded a corner, and the trail ended at a cliff. No footprints. No red jacket. No man. Nothing but an endless drop. She realized then that if he hadn't disappeared, she would have walked straight off the edge following him. The 10th and final story was the one that stayed with me the most. It was submitted anonymously, with no name, no return email, just a file attachment and a single line. "This is why I stopped hiking." The file was a written account from a woman who had gone on a solo weekend hike in the Appalachians. She described how the forest seemed to shift as she went deeper, trees bending subtly toward her, roots forming shapes that almost resembled fingers curling inward. At night, she camped near a rocky overlook. She woke to the sound of someone walking around her tent, slow and deliberate. Then something pressed a hand against the nylon. Not a paw, not claws, a human hand. She held her breath, gripping her knife. Then, in a voice identical to her own, the thing outside said, "Let me in." She froze. The voice repeated it, again and again, each time sounding more like her, until it was perfect, her tone, her pitch, her breath. "Let me in." She didn't move,
Didn't speak.
Eventually the pressure lifted, the footsteps retreated, and the forest went silent. The next morning, she ran the entire way back to her car. The last line of her message read, "It wanted to wear me home." All 10 stories share different forests, different hikers, different trails, yet each one ends the same way, something in the wilderness calling to them, almost choosing them. And maybe that's what hikers truly mean when they say nature is alive. Not alive like trees and animals. Alive like something else. Something older. Something waiting.